Hey, everybody, welcome to Friends, Life, and Ministry. And today we're going to do a talk that's going to take you a little more into the ministry side, but I think it would apply no matter what area you've worked in or what kind of job. We're going to talk about some of the things related to ministry jobs, because that's what we know the best. And we want to base it off a quote from Annie Duke, a decision theorist and former professional poker player. Who knew those went together? She published a book in 2022 called Quit, The Power of Knowing When to Walk Away. And in that book, she wrote, quitting on time will usually feel like quitting too early. So Bill Ankerberg brought this up, so I'm going to ask him to comment on it first. Bill, talk to us a little bit about, particularly in ministry settings, about either when to quit a job or quit an emphasis of ministry or
Yeah.
change jobs within ministry.
Well, that quote was from the Wall Street Journal, and so it's highly regarded kind of a thinking about when people sometimes uh, stay in things too long. I had a man in my church in Palos Hills, Illinois, who was the vice president of Shearson in Chicago, and I said, "What's the biggest mistake people make in investing?" And he says they can't admit they made a mistake. And they will buy a stock and they will just ride it all the way down until there's nothing there anymore. And I think sometimes it can be like that in any job. Certainly, ministry is not exempt from that. And there comes a time when you're trying to decide and discern God's will. Is this a time for me to go, or is this a time for me to stay? And I know that the churches in Minnesota, I've heard, have kind of a quote about it's better to leave 1 week too soon than 1 month too late. It's like it's you can stay too long, and I think it's good for us to talk about that. So I'm interested to hear what each of us is going to say about that. But certainly, you look in popular culture, you look at like Jerry Seinfeld, who left kind of at the peak of his television popularity. And then on the other side, you've seen TV shows that get kicked off of TV, and the people are begging for jobs, and all of a sudden 200 people are out of work, and can't you keep our program on? And it doesn't look good, but it's more complicated in ministry, isn't it, Paul?
Yeah, I want to go to John. I think the when you look at Europe and you look at organizations, you work with mission organizations. How do you assess just even whether you should be in ministry, or maybe if you've been in ministry at times where you go, I thought this was for me, but maybe it's not for me.
Yeah, there's of course an issue there. We should not assume that everyone who does a theological training or does seminary, so that they are supposed to be pastors. We have to realize that there's a whole lot of people that will never be pastoring like successful churches like in America, where you think about the fact that, oh, this is a good pastor because we have grown 300% or 600% or whatever. There's a whole lot of people that are called to just lead a house church of maybe 20, 30 people. And that's what they're supposed to do the rest of their lives. And that's a great calling. And they might have a normal job to get their income from, but do this. And I think the large majority of the churches in our world are actually based on that, on voluntary leadership. That's true of Estonia and Lithuania, Latvia, and Sweden, and I mean there's a lot of church initiatives where the people cannot really depend on the income from the church. So there's a whole kind of different scenario too. And at the same time, there's also a whole lot of career thinking, I would say, where people say like, okay, I'm going to be working as a pastor in this or this church, like 3 or 4 or 5 years. While I think a general call, to be honest, is like, in the same way as the people of Israel, that God brought them over to Babylon, and they were complaining about that fact that they were like that they were led there and brought there in their eyes by the hands of the enemy. But then God said, I carried you there. And now you sort of, you start blessing this place. And I think, also in regards to colleagues in general, that we have to be open for a lifetime call for any place God calls us to, and not think career like, it's like, okay, I have a great opportunity. Or if people feel like they have nothing more to give, then the question could also be, um, I cannot help myself to grow because we need to continue to grow. And there's a whole lot of pastors out there that change churches after 4 or 5 years, and because they have not grown and they have nothing more to give. And if you
They
come to that,
just keep doing the same thing over and over again.
that is
Yeah, yeah,
they have their sermons and their subject, and this is what they can, and they stop
yeah.
growing. And of course, you want to leave. But anyway, that's a little bit.
It's interesting because John, you're in one way you're saying, don't get caught on trying to build a career and sort of have that picture of a career. And then on the other side too, don't think just because you have credentials to do something that means you should do it. And I think in
Yeah.
both cases it can require courage to stay and courage to quit doing something. I'd say if I mean I've been at the same church for 35 years, but I would say there are 5 or 6 different reinventions of the way I did the job and who I was within that job. So there were those points of courage to say, I've got to do it in a different way. Steve,
Mhm.
when you hear this conversation, what comes to your mind?
Well, I see a couple of different areas. Um, Now, I'm a softy at heart, and so I end up thinking about those who are going to go through a difficult time and could be discarded and not know what to do. Actually, if you were to get an undergraduate degree in the Bible and then a master's degree in the Bible or in theology, and then you go and try to get a different job, those degrees may hurt you in getting another opportunity if you're looking for just any work, secular work.
Yeah.
The other thing that I've noticed is when a new pastor comes in, a lot of times there is just an assumed expectation that that pastor will be building their team. Maybe it's people that they've known for a long time and that they trust, and they don't know the people that are there at the current time. My son David is a pastor in La Crescenta, California, and when he came, they had 2 other um, full-time pastoral positions, and both of these men, in this case, wanted to go and become a lead pastor, a teaching pastor, and David had to make up his mind because at that point, neither of them were getting any opportunities. Um, and they both wonderful men. Um, and so what he decided to do is he took one of them and he had them preaching. I think it was about once a month, and he would work with one in order to really try to help that person develop skills. And then when he put out resumes and there were videos of him preaching and things like that, he was able to get a position. Now, it wasn't a lead position, but it was a staff position in a larger Southern California church. And then there's another man who then stepped up and was speaking about once a month, and a lot of investment and training. And these are people who love God. They do have some skills, and David realized that if he had um, transitioned earlier and didn't allow them to make a transition naturally from the church, that maybe they would never be hired. And so this gentleman decided he wanted to go into church planting. And church planting doesn't always end up with a very high success rate in terms of being able to sustain itself. And he was a brave man, and he tried it, and it just didn't work out. And when my son heard that, he called him up and he said immediately, I want you to speak once every 6 weeks at the church that he was pastoring, and you can put on any resume that you're a part of our staff. So he wasn't left out there just dangling. Um, I think that I just really care for about these people, and if there are some people who I've talked to, who I've said, your title of having a gift of being a pastor has nothing to do with you being compensated for it, just like John was just speaking of. And that in many ways, if you can support yourself outside of the church and use your gifts within the church, you have more freedom and you have the ability to just serve tremendously. And so I I don't know. I wasn't in the position because I had started the churches that I pastored. But when I was finished with a major project down in Orlando, I didn't know what the next step was. And so, Bill, you have worked hard at placing pastors. Could you give, um, say that a gifted 40-year-old pastor came to you and said, I've stepped down from my job. There needed to be a transition. What should I be doing next? And then real frank realities on the timelines and the challenges of finding a position.
I think the shortest talk I can give on it is I have to give this talk a lot to pastors that they're trying to decide if it's time for them to leave, and I may be trying to offer another alternative to them. Pretty much, I work for Converge Southwest. We have 132 churches. I help place about one senior pastor every year, kind of on average. And I have to, I tell pastors you need two things. You all know you need a call. You need to have God's sense that this church is the place that God wants you and it's the right time. It has to make sense for your family. It has to, it has to make sense for life and your extended family. For example, if your mother is in great need, you're not going to move away a long ways away from that. But the other thing I tell people is you need a release from the ministry you're at. That's the one they tend to ignore. You really need to have a spiritual sense that God has released you from the ministry you're in to really free you then to begin to pursue other things. You need to have both.
And that sort
How
of
long
goes
did
back
it
to what
take?
John was saying, that sense that it's a calling from God and to know when God's releasing you from that calling.
Yeah.
How long, Bill, does it typically take if I if I I'll give you a scenario. I find
Yeah.
tension, and after praying about it, I realize that I'm not going to be able to resolve the tension, and I feel in my heart that the best thing that I can do is step down. Um,
I think it's at least a minimum would be a year, probably most people year and a half to 2 years. Church search teams, search committees don't work very fast. They're notoriously slow because they don't want to make a mistake, and
mhm.
so they're going to work it and work it and work it, and it's not going to go fast. It just doesn't. So that's one of the hard parts. You feel like you're trying to get out of where you are, and it just doesn't happen quick.
Would you suggest volunteering at a church where a pastor that you
I
trust?
I would try to hang in where you are as long as you can. Uh, I wouldn't have a negative effect on the church at that point. If you need to leave, leave, and God will open up the door somewhere. But uh, I normally in my life, I didn't want to go to another church until you know, I wouldn't leave the church I was at until I had a job offer at another church. I think that's pretty normal, isn't it?
Yeah, that seems like some real practical advice. Hey, in the few minutes we have left, let me turn it this way. How about some ministry or activity you were doing where you that you've kind of looked and said that we need to quit doing that? Can you
Yeah.
remember a time where you didn't quit doing it early enough? Or I see John's got a big smile. Do you have something that comes to mind, John?
Well, I mean, it's like this. If something is biblical and it doesn't give fruit, then just stop it after having tried it and prayed for it. If there's nothing in the Bible about it, so it's quite new or different, and it gives fruit, like continue and expand it. I think we have to dare to just say this just didn't work, and I think in let's say God can speak and tell us to continue to do something. And we look at the history of missions, we see that people have been praying and praying and investing of their lives into very difficult places, and they had to wait many years. And so when we know God says, really God says, do it, then you stay with it. But I think there's a whole lot of things that we're doing that once were successful, once gave the fruit, and it has become like our pet ministry, and we just continue to do it because a few of those vision carriers are still around, and they just cannot deal with the fact that this has to die so that it can bring new fruit, actually.
Paul, have you had to let people go from church when you came in as a pastor, though, in those 35 years? And how do you handle that quickly?
Oh, yeah, we've had people we've had to let go where they, and it's with real humility because usually it means we put them in a position where their gifts weren't able to really work well. Sometimes where there have been moral or work related issues. It's always hard to tell somebody um, that this job won't work out for them. I
Yeah.
I think in our church, one of the things we've tried to do is try a lot of things and then quit doing a lot of things. We tried one time this service, an alternate church service called Praxis. And our worship leader and I just loved it. We did all kind like we would do guided prayer times, extended scripture reading, time for reflection, all these great things. And often the worship team would be bigger than the number of people attending. And after we did about 5 or 6 of them, and I just said, I love these, but
Yeah.
this isn't the venue for continuing to do it. And I think there's something real healthy if you give yourself permission to end things. It gives other people the permission to end things. And rather than looking at it as a failure, it's like looking and go, well, we tried something. And um, I think that can be a healthy part of quitting things is you're giving people the opportunity to say, well, we tried at that.
It's not only trying, it's also we learn from it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we learned something from it. And in a way, then we incorporated a lot of those praxis ideas into house groups, and that became real beneficial. Guys, I think I'm going to call it here. It's always a tough thing to know when to quit a ministry, to when to quit doing a job. And but if I were something,
or when they quit a podcast, even
when to quit a podcast, what I would say, particularly what I'm hearing from everybody is make sure you're hearing from God and make sure that you give grace to people that have served. Hey,
and be
thanks for
generous. Be
listening.
generous if you've got to let them go.
Good,
Be more
good,
generous than you need to be.
Good point. Hey, thanks everybody.
Okay.
Bye. God bless.